Okay. Good morning. A very warm welcome to the 19th Enable, Evaluate and Excel webinar series of the Institute of Company Secretaries of India. Today, I have a wonderful set of panelists with me. To my right is Narayan Shankar. To my left is Geetika Anand, and next to her is Sudhakar. My panelists need no introduction. And with this, I would like to just give a brief of Secretarial Standards 1. It's a very vast topic that we have today to cover, and we just have about 2 hours to discuss this. While we would have very much liked to discuss the different nuances of secretarial standards generally, as you all are aware, secretarial standards came into force from the 1st of July 2015, and it has been very well embedded. We have embraced good corporate governance practices, and it was always there and it has now been documented. So to that extent, secretarial standards are nothing but governance practices. So today we would not be discussing each of these points. What we would like to focus on are the different changes which have been introduced, which have come into effect from 1st of October 2017. The format of today's program, I would like each of the panelists to initially give an overview of some of the changes that they would like to cover in not more than 10 minutes, post which we would be free to take on questions. Please send in your questions to the site as is given on the webinar series. Over to you, Sudhakar, if you can just take us through some of the broad changes.
Yeah. Thank you, Savitri, and good morning to all of you. Some of the changes which has come is basically the revisions which have taken place is that there are a lot of changes are there in the Companies Act 2013. To align with the Act, we have made some changes. In addition to that, based on the feedback what we have received while implementing the standards, those wherever the issues are to be taken care, they have been taken care of. The change has come is that there is a change in the definition of the committee. Earlier, the standard SS1 is applicable to all the committees of Board of Directors. Now only those committees which are constituted under the Act, the SS1 is applicable to those committees only. Basically, these are Audit Committee, Nomination Recommendation Committee, Corporate Social Responsibility Committee and Stakeholder Relationship Committee. Technically, that means we have one more committee which is under the listing regulations, that is the Risk Management Committee. Technically, SS1 is not applicable to that. But however, my strong advice is that wherever the committees of the Board of Directors are there, it is advisable to comply with the standard. In addition to that, the notice cannot be sent by courier now. The notice can be sent by speed post, registered post, by electronic mail, but it cannot be sent by courier. The reason being actually to align with the again section 173, this change has been made. The board meetings now can be held on a national holiday, though as per the Act, adjourned board meetings cannot be held on a national holiday. Again, to align with the Act, this change has been made. Wherever the directors, of course, they can participate in the board meetings through video conferencing unless until the restricted items are there. The restricted items, the directors cannot participate in that even with the permission of the chair, which was there earlier. But now to align with the Act, this change has been made. Though there is a provision in the amendment bill 2017, it is there till such time that makes an Act, no director can participate in the board meeting through video conference for the restricted items. Wherever the proofs are to be sent, that notice, dispatch of agenda, whatever the proof is there, that is to be maintained for a minimum period of 3 years, and or alternately that whatever the time period which the board decides beyond 3 years. We see that if any director wants to attend the meeting through a video conferencing, the company is under obligation to provide such video conferencing. This is a major change which has come because under 173(2), basically the director has a right to attend the board meeting either in person or through electronic means. That's why the obligation is there under the company. In case the director wants to attend the board meeting through a video conferencing, the company has to provide the video conferencing facility and to enable the director to attend the meeting through electronic means. At the same point of time, it is also imperative for the company to, while issuing the notice, to mention that in case any director wants to attend the meeting through electronic means, they have to intimate the option is available, and in case the director wants to attend the meeting, they have to intimate to the company secretary or to the chairman of the meeting well in advance, so that the necessary arrangements can be made. Any other item with the permission of the chairman, yes, it can be taken place, but that it is to be ratified by the majority of the board subsequently. Unless until it is ratified by the majority of the board, even if that it is approved by the majority of directors present at the meeting, that resolution cannot be taken as passed. In addition to that, wherever the board minutes, within 15 days after signature of the board minutes, the certified copy of the minutes are to be circulated to the all the directors, but another provision has been made based on the feedback what we have received, considering the sensitivity of the document, whether to certify, to provide the certified copies or not. In case the board waives its right to have that signed copies, that point of time the board need not the company need not circulate the signed copy of the minutes. That waiver possibility is there. Similarly, that the draft minutes, when they are circulated, within 7 days of that, the directors have to give their observations, and in case any observations received beyond the 7 days, the chairman used to permit that, chairman has a right to permit that, whether to consider those suggestions or not before 30 days of recording the minutes. But however, now under the revised standard, the chairman is to be authorized by the board for accepting such suggestions. Unless until that authority is there, he will not be able to do it. These are a few major changes which has come according to me, and rest of the things we will discuss in the process of the webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, Sudhakar. I would now request Geetika to give us an overview.
Thank you. Hello everyone. I will briefly cover the major amendments that the revised SS1 has brought in the clauses 2, 3 and 4 of the SS1. The first one, clause 2.1, where a clarity has been brought by the Secretary Standards Board with respect to the meetings to be held in a calendar year. Where earlier there was a mention about holding at least 4 meetings, there has been a clarity by inserting the words calendar year, which necessarily now means that 4 meetings can be held in one calendar year in such a way that the maximum interval between 2 consecutive meetings is 120 days. I think by bringing this, SS has brought some clarity in the ambiguity which was otherwise lying around the industry. The second one is on quorum for the meeting of the committees which is to be held. So for the board, we all are aware of as to what is the quorum, obviously restricted by respective articles. However, for the committees, the SS has tried to bring a clarity where it says that the quorum for the meeting of the committees of the board would be something that has been specified by each board in respect of its committees. And otherwise, for the compulsory committees like audit committee, the act already mentions what is the composition, and for specific listed companies, listed company also requires to have certain quorum. This is where the SS1 pitches in and allows the board of directors to specify specific quorum for such committees. The next one, which I think is one of the most important ones, is some clarity around how to maintain attendance registers and how to preserve them. First, the SS gives away with a word which was inserted in the clause, which earlier read as separate attendance registers are required to be maintained for board and committees. The revised SS1 removes the word separate, thereby meaning that it is not required to necessarily have separate attendance registers for all the board and the committee meetings. Having said that, it does not mean that on a single page all the meetings on a single day can be recorded. What it does away with is only the registers which are separate, and it also allows the companies to maintain attendance registers in a loose leaf form. However, there is some discipline which is required if it is required to be maintained in a loose leaf form, which is where SS requires you to periodically bind the said loose leaf papers, not less than 3 years. The next one is on the signatures and the mode of presence of the attendance registers, where a director or any person by invite is attending the meeting through video conferencing facility, then the chairman or the company secretary, in case there is no company secretary, the chairman or any other director who is present can authenticate that the said person was attending through VC. One additional requirement is of mentioning the mode of presence if a person is attending through video conferencing, and therefore if you know that the meeting is being held through video conferencing, the requirement is to have a column for mode of presence and mention that it is being done electronically. The next one is on inspection, which is SS tries to bring some clarity around the right of inspection of a director to inspect the minutes and other papers of the said meeting. What we are trying to say here is if a director ceases to be a director, he can inspect the minutes of the board meetings for the period for which he was a director, not after the period that he ceases. I think this is very important considering the cases involved in the future prospects, and therefore I think SS brings due clarity here. The next one is very important. Another important amendment is as to people ask us often how long are we supposed to keep the proof of sending the notices and receipt acknowledgements, how long should we preserve them. SS brings a clarity where it says that the board is free to decide as to what period they want to do. However, 8 years is a minimum period because it coincides with all the other Limitation Act and many other regulations, and therefore SS tries to bring some clarity there. The next one is about a chairman attending a meeting, especially with respect to related party. One of the major changes that you would see in SS1 is alignment of SS with amendments in law. There has been an MCA exemption notification for the private companies, and this amendment that I am talking about aligns it with there, where the chairman, after disclosing his interest, can attend and participate in the related party transaction. However, if he is an interested party, then he has to leave the meeting. I think there for private companies it aligns with the act. These I think are the major ones in clauses 2, 3, 4 that I wish to cover. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Gitika. Over to Narayan Shankar, if you can cover some of the other points.
I'd like to cover some points pertaining to the chairman and points relating to the circular resolution and so on. As you are aware, the term chairman is not defined at all in the act. You hardly have any few guidance on that. You have more guidance in terms of case laws which elaborate this, and of course the model articles of association that allows the board to elect a chairman and determine the period. Here is where I feel secretarial standard comes into play of actually not only defining chairman as chairman of the board or committee, what will be his role, whether in terms of convening, whether in terms of any other item of business, conduct of meetings, even if the integrity of the meeting in terms of electronic media, etc. Generally, it is a practice that the board appoints a chairman who will function as chairman of the board until otherwise resolved. That means till the time the director is there or a particular period, whichever the board decides, based on that the chairman functions. Now, if we have to go to the changes which have now come into the chairman, the change number 1 which is brought in SS1 is that an interested chairman shall entrust the conduct of proceedings in respect of an item where he is interested to a non-interested director with the consent of majority of directors present. Earlier it was consent of directors present, and sometimes there were issues in terms of having deadlock even if one director does not allow you in this regard. Hence the word now used is majority of directors. In case of private company, of course, chairman may continue to chair and participate in the meeting after disclosure of his interest. This is again alignment with the MCA notification. Third, if the item of business is a related party, as Gitika has rightly mentioned, chairman shall not even be present at the meeting, whether physically or through electronic mode during discussions and voting on such item. Next point, in terms of when the meeting is held through an audiovisual mode, the chairman has to take due and reasonable care to safeguard integrity of the meeting. He also has to ensure that the proceedings are recorded and also safekeeping of the recordings. The chairman also has to ensure that the required quorum is present throughout the meeting, and at the end of discussion on each agenda item, the chairman will have to announce the summary of the decisions taken thereon. This is broadly the changes brought about. Of course, as we rightly mentioned, it is evolving, and the more there are changes happening, whether in terms of companies bill or the Uday Kotak committee, we will have to relook and see how it changes. For example, the Uday Kotak committee requires that all listed entities where more than 40% public shareholding is there, the chairman will have to be a non-executive director. Here the date put is April 2020. So from there you will have to see, and if these recommendations are accepted and it comes as part of LODR, from 1st April 2020 you will see a clear bifurcation between the roles of the executive and the chairman, irrespective of course whether the articles provide or no. In fact, after 2020, SEBI is also thinking of extending it to other companies. Companies with non-independent chairman will have to compulsorily now designate a lead independent director. This is going to trigger from October 1 to 2018. And of course, the committee has also gone into very detailed, in like 50% independent directors, one woman director, subjective assessment of independence, disclosure of skill metrics, management engagement, periodic training on roles and responsibilities, knowledge building on industry and business. So as and when changes take place, I'm sure we will also be looking into guidance note and changes into the standard. The second one which I would like to touch upon is the matter on circular resolution. The first change which has come out is the chairman of the board, or in his absence the managing director, or in their absence any director can decide whether the approval of the board can be taken on any business by way of a circular resolution. An additional 2 days has also been added for the service of the draft resolution in case the same has been sent by the company by speed post, registered post or by courier. However, having said this, the director concerned will have to ensure that he responds to the CR, that is the circular resolution, in such a way that his response reaches the chairman or the company secretary or any other person authorized on or before the expiry of the said time limit of 7 days. The other change is really in terms of the when is really the circular resolution deemed to be passed. It is deemed to be passed where there is no change. The last dates of course specified for signifying assent or dissent, which will not be more than 7 days. But the change now is in part B, which is the date on which assent has been received from the requisite majority, provided on that day the number of directors who have not yet responded, along with directors who have expressed the desire to have this as part of a meeting, shall not be 1/3 or more of the total number of directors. What this clearly means that if you want to have a circular resolution passed before the last date, you will have to ensure that requisite majority, that is the majority is already in your favor, and B, people who have not responded or people who have asked for the meeting, for that resolution to be passed in the meeting, should not be 1/3 or more. That means once you cross the 2/3, then you are automatically in safe harbor and you can even consider as passed before the last day. One more thing, while secretarial standard pertains only to mandatory 4 committees, however 175 applies, that is circular resolution applies to all committees. Hence it would be advisable that as part of good governance, the provisions of para 6 of SS also is followed as a good governance practice by companies even for other committees. The chairman, if interested, cannot decide to pass the resolution by circular except in case of a private company, where an interested chairman may also decide whether, or a director can decide whether approval can be sought by way of a circular resolution. Proof of sending of the draft circular etc. will have to be maintained for a period of 3 years. Thereafter, the other change which has happened really is what we will call a requirement of disclosure in the director's report. The SS now clearly mandates that the report of board of directors shall include a statement on compliance of applicable secretarial standard. So the it is not only the duty of the company secretary, also the directors have to confirm it as part of the director's report. Such a confirmation can either be as part of the DRS, which we call director's responsibility statement, or elsewhere, but it has to be part of the director's report. This broadly I thought would sum up the changes with respect to chairman, circular resolution and director's report.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Narayan. I think you've covered some of the important points, and the most important one, I quite like the point on mention in the director's report, because that is something which has been clearly introduced as a new change in the secretarial standards now. In fact, the director's report, since it is supposed to be confirming compliance, even NCLT could possibly just look at the chairman's, the director's report, which has been adopted by the board, and use it as one where the company has complied with the standards. I believe NCLT has now started asking companies as to whether there is compliance of secretarial standard with respect to notice and the like, which will also reduce some of the basic questions which come up in the litigations before NCLT. While I'm tempted to ask several questions on my own, we've already started getting good number of questions, and let me move on with the first one on video conferencing. This question is to Sudhakar. The question that I have received is, while video conferencing facility is now required to be provided in the notice itself, stating that a director may participate through VC, it also says that the director has to give sufficient prior intimation to the company or the company secretary, chairman or the company secretary, saying that he would be participating through video conferencing. What exactly does this term sufficient prior intimation mean? If you can just clarify a little bit on this.
Yeah. See that the obligation to provide the video conferencing facility for a director to attend the board meeting is on the company. Basically, this revision has come to align the standards with the Act as such, because under 173(2), it stipulates that a director can attend the board meeting either in person or through electronic means. This means that it is the right of the director to attend the meeting through electronic means also. Wherever it is not possible for him to attend the board meetings in person, he can ask the company that I would like to attend the meeting through VC, you kindly provide the facility. In case a director is asking like that, it is the obligation of the company to provide such facility. That a director can ask that he will be participating through electronic means, he can give a request to the company in the beginning of the year, or alternately meeting to meeting also he can give it. Now the question comes, when the director is making a request to the company, what is the obligation on the company secretary? It is the company secretary has to consult his chairman or the managing director, whoever it is, and he has to ensure that video conferencing facility is organized. While organizing the video conferencing facility, it is the responsibility of the company secretary to ensure the security aspects, because that board meetings are always a very sensitive matter. So he has to ensure that while organizing the video conferencing facility, the security aspects are well taken care of. In addition to that thing, that small companies may face some kind of a problems in organizing the video conferencing. Maybe that the video conferencing facility is not available in that area, that point of time, or in the location where the video conferencing facility is not available. But nowadays that the kind of technology what is there, it is not a big task for the company secretary to organize such these things. Having said that, in case of any difficulty, definitely the company secretary has to approach the director in case of any difficulty, and he has to ensure that the director may attend in person. Now question comes, what is the sufficient notice is to be given? Yes, in case the director wants to attend the meeting through video conferencing, he has to intimate the company secretary well in advance, so that the necessary arrangements can be made. Now what is the sufficient time? For a company like ours, we can organize a video conferencing facility within the next 15-20 minutes, because we are able to organize. Ours is a large company. So the large companies are concerned, for them it is not a problem at all. But for small companies, what happened is, when they are not having the facility, they have to outsource this facility from somewhere and has to organize the video conferencing. So according to me, 2-3 days notice if the director gives to the company, that should be a proper this thing, and that so that the company secretary can gear up for that thing. As I was repeatedly mentioning, that the company secretary has to ensure not only the outsourcing the facility, but the security aspects of the video conferencing is very important.
Right. Okay. Sudhakar, you had also mentioned about adjourned board meeting right at the beginning, where you said that a board meeting may be convened on a national holiday although the Act very clearly provides with respect to an adjourned board meeting which is adjourned for want of quorum, which cannot be held on a national holiday. Which actually means, can the board adjourn the meeting on their own, by deciding at a board meeting and hold the meeting which is not adjourned for want of quorum on a national holiday? There is
See that technically, if you are going to purely technicalities, an adjourned board meeting for the want of quorum, it cannot be held on a national holiday. Suppose, for example, for paucity of time, suppose you have conducted a board meeting today, that the board meeting is going so late in the midnight, but there is a lot of agenda items is there, and they want to do it on the next day, which is a national holiday. Technically, there is no bar as such, but giving as a good governance measure, in case the company wants to avoid that, it is advisable. Otherwise, technically, there is no problem as such.
Yeah. Another question on adjourned meeting. Is the notice of an adjourned meeting required to be given to all directors, including those who had not attended the originally convened meeting?
Yes, absolutely. The notice of the adjourned board meeting is to be given to all the directors, even if sometimes it may so happen that the board meeting is adjourned, though you are not giving the notice in writing. At the meeting itself, you might have decided that the adjourned meeting will be held on the next day at so and so time. That point of time, it is the company secretary's responsibility to intimate all the directors who could not attend the meeting.
Right.
The adjourned meeting is going to take place on the next day at so and so venue on time. The reason being that the directors might not be able to attend that particular original board meeting.
Right.
They will certainly be able to make it to the adjourned board meeting. So, it is mandatory for the company secretary to intimate to all the directors who could not even attend the board meeting about the adjourned board meeting.
Sure. The next question is on any other business, and this is something which I would want all the panelists to be giving their views on. What is the procedure to be followed for taking up an item under AOB? We would start with you, Sudhakar, and after which I would also want Narayan to give his views. Yeah.
Yeah. See, this is a major revision which has come, according to me, in the SS1. Any other item with the permission of the chair. That means the item which has not been circulated while circulating the agenda items, or this particular item not even circulated to the directors as a supplementary agenda even. That means you are bringing this item only at the board meeting with the permission of the chairman. This means what? The directors who could not attend the meeting, they have no way to understand what is that item of business which is coming for discussion. So, here what happens is, as we all know, that the majority of directors present at the meeting, if they are approving the agenda item, the resolution is passed. Several times it so happens that, say for example, 12 directors are there on the board and the quorum is 7. Out of the 7, if 4 directors are approving the resolution, that resolution is passed.
Right.
That means out of the 12 board, 5 directors have no clue about that particular business item, but that is approved by the board. So, considering this, that every director should have a say on that particular thing, wherever the board, any other item with the permission of the chairman which has come before the board, that is to be subsequently ratified by the majority of the board. That means what? Say for example, as I was mentioning, that when the 12-member board is there, the majority of the board means it should be that 7 directors, no doubt about it, 7 are to be done. But out of the 7 people, which is the quorum only that is there, yes,
Sure.
no doubt about, sorry, that quorum is of course 1/3 of the board.
That's right.
That
Only
means
4
for a 12 board, even the 5 directors can be quorum.
Quorum.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, 5 directors quorum is there. Out of the 5, 3 have approved it.
Right.
That the resolution is passed.
Correct.
That means a 12 board, 7 directors have not attended the meeting. 3 directors are approving it, the resolution is passed, which is not fair enough.
Right.
So, here what happens is, in such case, that majority of the board of a 12 is 7.
Right.
So, it is to be ratified by another 4 directors. If it is approved by 3 directors, it is to be approved by another 4 directors, that is approved by the majority.
Sure.
Having said that, in the board meeting itself, out of the 12 board, 9 directors are present. Out of the 9 directors, say 8 directors have approved it.
Right.
That means majority of the board has approved that particular item. In such case, that ratification subsequently is not required.
Right.
Because of these provisions, what happens is that though the resolution is approved by the board, unless until that is ratified, the certified copy of the resolution is not to be given. unless until the ratification takes place. And about this ratification also, this is to be appropriately recorded in the board minutes.
Sure.
I'll just like to add on to this. So one action point clearly coming out is what the way Sudhakar has rightly pointed out, is that when you are speaking to your internal departments, your stakeholders internally, and if an AOB is to be taken, you have to first ensure that if a lot of times you may have to give a certified true copy of the resolution or a relevant portion immediately. So first you have to ensure that if you are taking an AOB, you have majority of the directors of the board at that meeting. Otherwise, while you can initiate that AOB, it can be confirmed, or a certified true copy can be given only if it is ratified by the majority of the board. And hence, as company secretary, a person will have to ensure that if there is a critical AOB and the business is going to ask you to confirm the clearance of this, the majority of the directors themselves have to be present. Point number 2, which is also important, if AOB, there is a resolution to be passed, the secretarial standard clearly says that the resolution has to be tabled.
Right.
If the resolution, sometimes if it is not tabled, then such a resolution CTC can be given only after it is ratified by all and it is entered in the minutes book.
Right.
Here two things which company secretaries, compliance officers would have to take extreme care. The third point which we've always been discussing, while you have notice can be sent at a short notice, however, what is the position of an agenda which is sent post 7 days? That is, if prior to 7 days I have shot an agenda, but between day 7 and day 0, prior to the date of the board meeting, if you send any additional item, would it be an AOB or would it really be an agenda? One point which comes up clearly is, if you have given it to all, and the logic being is the majority of the directors or entire board is already aware of this item to be taken, they've been given a chance, even if they require to object, even if they don't attend. Hence, my view is even these type of agendas would not be considered as AOB, and hence you may not have to get into the rigors of and the procedure for AOB. Broadly, this is what my sum up of AOB. Unless if I have missed out something, Savitri, please add on.
Yeah, we would come to further points which we could take on AOB. Let me move on to Geetika now. Geetika, with respect to the attendance register, you did elaborate on some of the provisions there. What about invitees to the meeting? Several times you have invitees who only attend certain portion of the meeting. Can you just give your views on the attendance register and whether these persons are required to sign the attendance register?
Sure. Attendance registers are necessarily to be signed by the directors and the company secretary who attends the meeting. With respect to invitees, there are people basis the requirement of the agenda. Yes, there are times when we request special people to come, we invite them to come and attend the meeting and give their point of views. According to the secretarial standard, yes, the attendance register needs to be signed by these people who are asked by invite. It is a stretch of a point of governance, because in the minutes we record what happens at the meeting, and yes, if there are such people who've come, who've made presentation, who've deliberated, who've given information to the directors, it is very important for the board minutes to record such point that who are the people who were attending the meeting by invite, and therefore the attendance register, yes, needs to be signed by all these people who attend by invitation. Not just that, if there are people who attend by invitation through electronic means, in that case as well, the attendance register does need to mention, the company secretary should ensure that the attendance register does mention the mode of presence of the invitees in case they attend the meeting through electronic modes.
Absolutely. Okay. Sudhakar, would you like to add on something on this
Yeah, I
particular
would like
point?
to just say that in case of authentication of the attendance register,
Right.
see that earlier the director's register is to be authenticated by the company secretary or the chairman of the board of that particular meeting. Now only that wherever the directors are attending the meeting through video conferencing, only that particular attendance, of course that if a director is attending the board meeting through video conference, no signature is required.
Right.
that particular document is to be authenticated by the company secretary. That means if the directors are presenting, all the entire board is presenting in person, then that authentication, that register need not be authenticated as such.
One point I wanted to add on, or rather pose a question, including you, Savitri, is a lot of times while we ask people or invitees to attend the board meeting, we have to really be careful or mindful in terms of the PIT regulations. And how do we ensure that each and everybody attending the board meeting, and you're talking about an attendance register which will be a permanent record, do every one of them qualify or pass the threshold of need to know basis? As you're aware, in Piramal Enterprise, SEBI has taken a call that if it is not, like if you have other than legitimate purpose, performance of duties and so on and so forth, you cannot communicate UPSI. Specifically, it is not as part of management. Recently, an overseas regulator is actually today investigation getting a matter where in fact an administrative staff as part of where this meeting actually came to know about a UPSI and leaked it out, and they are being prosecuted. So all I'm just wanting to ask, Savitri, is how do we, to what extent, if a person comes, how do we get that legitimate purpose, performance of duties? And third, would everybody attending a board meeting and gets an UPSI in their hands, would they be a connected person?
Sure. I think this is exactly where the secretarial standards have a role to play. The starting point, of course, as was also mentioned by Gitika and Sudhakar, is the attendance register, which bears testimony of the fact that a person had indeed attended the meeting. And the point that you raised, Narayan, is very relevant in the sense that a person who gets access to discussions which are of a strategic nature at a board meeting, the suspicion of the person being a connected person is definitely going to be there. Or rather, such a person would be deemed to be a connected person. Question is, what is the duration for which he was at the meeting? Did he actually be privy to, was he actually privy to some discussion on that particular matter? Are issues which will have to be considered based on a case-to-case analysis. Having said that, a prima facie belief that the person is a connected person will be a good point to start on. Talking of administrative staff, any person who gets access to the place where a meeting is conducted is certainly said to be having access to UPSI, and which is exactly the reason Rule 3 of Chapter 12 rules, which deal with video conferencing, very clearly states that no other person should have access to the facilities, and which is exactly the reason, while it might appear to be a procedural issue, the chairman is supposed to be raising attendance at every item and also summarizing those items of business and also stating as to who is present on that particular item of business. While some of these points at this juncture we may feel is one where there is repetition, it becomes a necessary point because it's a piece of evidence eventually. And I think you've raised a very good point by referring to SEC. Even in India, we have seen a good number of changes. Like, for example, Facebook is being used just to see the friend list of persons and to see as to who is a deemed connected person. So I think the law in practice is evolving, and hence it makes it imperative to have good practices put in place right from the beginning.
Savitri, that I would like to add one more thing also arising out of this. One thing is definitely the company secretary's responsibility is to take the attendance of the person. Sometimes it so happen we are inviting the person only for a particular agenda item. So it should not happen he is taking him as an invitee. In such case, he is to be taken as invitee for that particular agenda item only, and accordingly it is to be recorded in the minutes also.
Yes,
Several times I advise the company secretaries might be attending the board meetings of other companies in the capacity, say for example, as a merchant banker. When you are signing the attendance register, please do ensure that you are present only for that particular agenda item, so that you will not get into these kind of problems.
Even minute it also accordingly.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think that's a very good point on minutes.
Sorry, Savitri, second point I wanted to ask is, to what extent do you get into documentation? Are you saying, like, since you mentioned about SEC, they are also investigating, are we supposed to, while we take NDAs from invitees, but do you have to take NDAs from even administrative staff? The person who's perhaps as part of the infrastructure, part of IT. To what extent do we get into documentation? Because one of the things which is being investigated is every administrative staff do not assume and presume that he would not have knowledge of what is going on. And hence, should we have a non-disclosure, a non-chop agreement clearly signed by everybody who enters the boardroom?
Right. I think this is a very subjective question. One cardinal principle that I would state, this is of course my view, is that when there's a presentation on financial results, ensure nobody enters the room, not even the person to serve tea or coffee. That's something which is essential to follow. Similarly, I would say any other business is also a sensitive item. So therefore, I mean, it's not that every item of AOB is sensitive, but having said that, it would be fair to say that generally AOB items are ones which are sensitive. So therefore, ensure that when you're discussing AOB, there's no one else in the room and no one is allowed to come in. In between, that does not mean that people can just walk in and walk out. One needs to have a proper procedure put in place. And coming to the next issue of non-disclosure agreements, every person who's getting access to the boardroom, it's good to have an NDA. Of course, one cannot stretch it to an extreme where one says that even the person serving tea and coffee needs to have an NDA. But so long as you're able to maintain the basic hygiene, so long as you're able to ensure that access is restricted, there would be sanctity of preservation and protection of UPSI. That is something which needs to be very clearly maintained. Also, asymmetry of information, especially with respect to listed companies, is something which is very important, and that is something which needs to be ensured. Because while you may be having a general discussion, one or two statements can also become important statements, and that is something which needs to be worked on based on each individual company. And that's something which a company secretary needs to very clearly focus on.
Just I would like
ensure
to add one more thing
practices.
also. Now, several times company secretaries thinks that drafting a notice, circulating the notice and convening the meeting, and apart from the attendance registers, signatures, these are all routine stuff. They used to think like that. But with this discussion, it is coming that because the company secretary's responsibility is to uphold the integrity of the meeting.
Absolutely.
So the company secretaries have to ensure that while drafting the notice, it should be as per SS1. Because unless until the notice is in compliance with SS1, the entire board meeting may itself come to a scrutiny at the time of any litigation arises.
Right.
So it is a responsibility of the company secretary to ensure that notice, attendance register, maintenance also is a very important issue.
And
I
Sudha,
think
and one key takeaway which I can tell, you made such an important point. While we may be doing it in big companies, small companies need to be, the company secretaries have to be so careful. The point, Savitri, which you mentioned is that whenever an UPSI is discussed, ensure that you completely close out. Instructions procedurally, not even a person serving tea, coffee, nobody other than the board is present inside. Otherwise, in case of an investigation, the way SEC is doing today, if tomorrow an investigation gets into SEBI, it will be difficult for you to even justify existence of such people at the board.
Absolutely.
I
Just
think.
one
In fact,
point I'd
say
like
that-
to add.
Sorry, Geetika, you please go ahead. After that, I will add it.
Yes,
Okay.
Geetika.
The point I've been trying to say is that I think the role of the company secretary comes into picture right at this point in time, because I believe we are the one who help in conducting, convening and facilitating the meeting. The person who is actually convening the meeting is the chairman. And so to me, when we're doing a board meeting, I think the company secretary and the chairman need to work in tandem all throughout. Beyond just extending this beyond from a governance point of view, I think it will be very imperative and pertinent if all the directors, your board is aware as to what you're doing and why you are doing, because they should not suddenly feel we are closing out the door. So I think maybe either in a casual chat or otherwise, it is very important to keep your
Very
board
true.
updated as to why you are doing and what you are doing. So they would also
In
know
advance, you mean to
in
say.
advance.
Very true.
So if you're done with the routine items and we are done with the noting items, and when we move to specific items, I think it will be just a line by the chairman and the company secretary saying that we are moving to specific items, and this is UPSI. I think it just gives a signal to everyone that okay, now we are going to discuss something which is sensitive. So I think everyone would ensure that there's no one extra in the room, and when you talk, you're aware of what is happening around you. I think this is one practical point that I did want to mention. Not just the company secretary, but there are usually people who come and help you during the conducting of the meeting, especially from the company secretary team.
Right.
I think even if they are aware, there are office boys outside. If it works in tandem, I think
In fact,
that's
even the
how
IT teams, Geetika, isn't it?
exactly the
Correct
IT
what-
team. So if it works in tandem, I think it serves the purpose.
Absolutely.
Yeah, just I want to say that several times the company secretaries think that unpublished price sensitive information is only in respect of listed companies, which is not so. Because even in case of closely held companies also unpublished price sensitive information is very much you might be handling it. Say for example, a closely held company is planning to take over a listed company.
Absolutely.
That item, as far as that closely held company is concerned, it is to be guarded as UPSI. So the company secretary has to understand very clearly that UPSI is not only in case of listed companies, in case of unlisted companies also this is there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Geetika, you brought in a very nice point of items for noting, items for approval. Typically, all the items at a board meeting or for that matter a committee meeting also would comprise of items for noting, which may be routine items or it may be non-routine items for noting. Items for approval would also comprise of routine items for approval and non-routine items for approval. Actually, it may be a good idea to have an agenda classification clearly based on this principle so that the serial numbering also becomes easy and you proceed. That's a very good point, Geetika, that you brought in. I would actually like to go on to another question that I have received on attendance register. The question is, can a single page serve as an attendance register for all the committee meetings held in one day? So, I think somebody is trying to save some time. Geetika.
The answer according to me is no, because I'm just giving a practical example, and maybe then the answer would come out clearly itself. For example, when we do a board meeting and we do an audit committee meeting for results, I think we all start with series of risk management, audit committee meetings, and then move to board meetings. What happens during the day is you start with one meeting and then you go on doing the other committee meetings and you result into a board meeting. What if a person just enters the meeting in the start and signs and leaves after that? To me, attendance register is not just a requirement where you sign and you keep it off as a record keeping. To me, it's a record keeping and safety for the future purposes. I think that's what we all are trying to do here. And therefore, imagine if someone signs the attendance register and leaves the room after the first meeting. Are we trying to say that because of that one signature that he's affixed during the start of the day, he's meant to say that he's attended all the meetings? While there can be another school of thought, at Devil's Eye, we would say what is wrong, because the SS clearly says there is no requirement of a separate register and it can be mentioned in loose leaf form. I think SS is trying to help to bring some to remove some practical difficulties, but at the same time I don't think there is ever an intention to not have a safe record keeping. And to ensure a safe record keeping and to keep ourselves safe from future perspectives, I think every committee meeting has to have a separate page, if I am not saying a register, but a separate page. This also emanates from the requirement where we say that the attendance register needs to mention the serial number of that meeting. Now, you may have the third NRC for the financial year and you may have a second audit committee for the financial year. So, if you try to bring all of this in sync, it will look very absurd if we have a single piece of paper with columns saying audit, NRC, risk, CSR, 4th NRC, 6th NRC, and one person signing just in one box for all of this meeting. So, one from a clarity point of view, two from safety and record keeping point of view. According to me, no, in a single page you cannot sign for all the committee meetings that you do. The best you can do is if you do not want to maintain registers, but I think usually it's a practice now that companies do have separate attendance registers. Having said that, if you do want to maintain it in a loose leaf form, at least ensure that there is one single sheet for a single committee. Nothing prohibits us from saving paper there. So, from a proper record keeping point of view, I think the answer is no.
Sure. Geetika, I think you answered it very well by distinguishing between a page and a register. So, what you're basically saying is you could have one single register and have all the attendance sheets which go serially.
Yes.
That is, page number 1 relates to board meeting, page number 2 relates to an
Yes.
audit committee, 3 could relate to NRC and
Yes.
so on.
Yes.
It's not necessary to have separate registers, but please have a separate page.
So I was being asked, but I was being asked in one of the seminars where they said that you're removing the concept of separate attendance registers. I think the most popular way of doing it is having a attendance register for risk, for board, for audit, for CSR. Now if the requirement of separate register has gone, one of the other ways is a loose leaf form, which we just discussed. There's another way where the company was thinking, can I make one register for one financial year and make separators there and then put each page for say a CSR, a risk and NRC. I think that is absolutely right.
Yeah, I think the revised secretarial standards gives you extra flexibility there. Narayan, I would like to ask you this question. Can a director who is a part of multiple committees sign just once in the attendance register because all those meetings are held on the same day?
It appears no, because if you see 4.1.2, while Geetika was mentioning, I was just going through, because you have to mention in the attendance register a serial number, a date of the meeting, and one of the requirement is that the director has to sign at the meeting. Okay, and if he has signed all at one go, say at the beginning, you're saying at least there is one meeting where he has not signed it at the meeting, and he signed it out of the meeting. So hence, while we say you can combine a register, you need not have separate registers, but at least the committees which is mandatory under SS, at least for those which are not mandatory, you may adopt something different, but at least those committees which are mandatory, to which SS applies, you may have a consolidated register for all also. You need not have separate, but you may have to take, perhaps you'll have to go through the pain of taking signature multiple times.
Okay. Narayan, the next question is for you.
Yeah.
In case of circular resolutions, you need to circulate the draft resolution, which is required to be sent to both the original as well as the alternate director.
Correct.
Who would have the right to vote on such a resolution?
While you have to send the circular resolution both to the original as well as to the alternate director, it is only the alternate director which will have a right to vote. That's very clear.
Once again, another question on circular resolution. What is the date on which the circular resolution would be deemed to have been passed? How do you date a circular resolution?
So, as far as dating is concerned, there is no minimum period at all mentioned. The minimum period could even be the date when you are sending off the circular resolution. Like if I am sending it off today, I can even say that the deemed date is the same day which I am. The maximum is of course provided in SS1, which says you can't give in more than 7 days. Right. And the second point is, can you really treat a resolution passed before the date mentioned? Can you treat it before the date mentioned, which I mentioned as part of our discussion also earlier? Right. You can only treat it, A, you have to have a dual asset test, A, the requisite majority should have assented to the resolution. B, the leftover, you have to rule out the eventuality of people who have not voted and people who have asked that item to be in the meeting should not be more than 1/3, should be less than 1/3 rather. Right. So hence either assent or dissent, but you have to be careful that you have to cross the 2/3 what you can say threshold to ensure that it is, or to say that it is passed. For example, if you have 9 directors, say majority is 5 have already assented, but merely because 5 has assented, you cannot treat the resolution as passed prior to the last date mentioned. Right. You have to ensure that you cross that threshold of 7, because 6 will be 1/3. Right. So balance 2 people, even if they have either dissented, it's fine. Even if they have asked for a meeting to be held, it's fine. But cross the 2/3 in such a way that people who have assented to the meeting plus people who have dissented also, in such a way that it doesn't, you do not rule out the eventuality of 1/3, in short, what I want to say.
Savitri, only one thing I want to add to that circular resolution is, in fact, in one of the forums recently, somebody asked me that why that maximum 7 days? Why
Yeah.
not 10 days? See, I would like to clarify that, though there is no question as such on this subject, I thought of just clarifying it for the benefit of the company secretaries, that circular resolution is envisaged to meet the urgent requirement of the company. Otherwise, you could have hold a board meeting only.
Absolutely.
So, if you are giving 10 days, 15 days for a circular resolution, the purpose is defeated. That is the reason actually
Very
what we said was maximum 7 days. You can give even 1 day notice or 2 days this thing also by the time the directors have to respond.
Right. Narayan, you also brought in a very good point on dissent. So, if at all there is, the resolution gets passed, but the remaining 2 directors, let's assume both of them dissent, then when you're recording the circular resolution at the next board meeting, you would also have to record the dissent of
Dissent.
these 2 directors?
2 directors.
That's also
Absolutely.
required.
That would also
Wonderful.
be required.
Let's assume the circular resolution is passed by all the directors by putting a date and you receive it the next day. What will be the date of passing of the circular resolution? Will it be the date on which the directors have signed where they have also put the date, or will it be the date of receipt when you actually receive it the next day?
For all, whether it is assent, dissent, or even insisting on a matter to be held at a meeting, all should have been received by the company or company secretary before the date mandated, before the 7 days or the date mandated. Say for example, if a dissent is received after the last date and you have already have the requisite majority, you can go ahead and treat it as passed. You can have a second eventuality of, say, you have waited till the last day, you have the requisite majority, a person has abstained, and 2 people who suppose tantamount to breaching that 1/3 ask you for a circular resolution to be held at a meeting, but that request comes to you after the last date, you can still go ahead and treat it as passed.
I think that's a very good point. Gitika, I would like you to answer this question. What is the mode by which a director would communicate his request for granting him leave of absence? Is it necessary for it to be in writing, or can it be an oral request?
The leave of absence is required to be informed to the company secretary, or where there is no company secretary, to a chairman in advance. That is what the secretarial standard says. And therefore, if I read it right, and also to just understand the convenience that we need to put the directors in, is he can communicate either in writing or in oral, which means that he may call up the company secretary or the chairman of the board to say that I may not be able to attend this meeting. If it's in writing, that's the best form, and therefore I'm not elaborating there, but I'm trying to elaborate on something which is not by practice. But sometimes he may call up, sometimes his secretary may send a WhatsApp. So maybe a second question that one may ask is it required that only the director should inform that he is being absent, or what if someone else does? I think the reply for both the questions would be same. Is I think what the law is trying to do is to give the company secretary and the chairman of the meeting enough advance intimation that a director may not be able to attend. Having said that, I think it's very important from a record keeping point of view, and also for future convenience, that a company secretary records this fact in one or the other way. Sure. So for example, if a director would call me, or a secretary or his secretary would send a WhatsApp or an SMS to say that he will not be able to come for the meeting, I think it is very easy to just drop a confirmatory mail where you can just mention that this refers at Elecon, and can you please confirm you've mentioned about leave of absence, and this will be recorded at the meeting. I think by doing this practice, we kind of close the loop for any future ambiguity.
Sure.
So anything which can be recorded well is a good method of.
Sure. Narayan, if an item in which the chairman is interested is placed as AOB, will the permission of the chairman be required before such an item is considered?
Yeah, an AOB can be taken up at a meeting only with the permission of the chairman. So we cannot have a case of any other items of business to be tabled without the permission of the chairman.
Okay. What exactly does this an item of business which is referred to in para 5 mean? When we're referring to item of business, it seems very simple. But at the same time, there are a couple of questions which have been raised on what is the interpretation of the word an item of business. Narayan, if you can just address this.
While clause 5 mentions that if the chairman is interested in any item of business, he will entrust the proceedings to a non-interested director with the permission of majority of the directors. The key question is, what do you mean by the word interest in any item of business? Any item of business will have to be interpreted as any item which is either there in the agenda or enters the agenda through an AOB route. That is, if it is either there in the agenda or it has put into the agenda as any other item of business. Other than these two, you cannot have an extraneous item of business. It will have to be linked to these two, and hence to a certain extent, if you say it is then completely dependent on the discretion of the chairman, and you may even have I can say cases of deadlock if the case if the AOB, for example, is pertaining to the removal of the chairman himself. So can the chairman, if either ideally the chairman will say, yes, I am interested in this, I step down and give the proceedings to other. But if the chairman refuses to even entertain that AOB, then I feel there would be a deadlock and it cannot be passed, or we cannot force through that item in that meeting. Of course, nothing stops the directors in holding a meeting or convening a meeting, issuing a notice to have a meeting even 10 minutes after that meeting. But in that meeting, Savitri, at least it appears, my view is, in that meeting, you will not be able to force through. Would you agree to this?
Sure.
You would have a deadlock in that.
I agree with you, Narayan, that one can always have a further meeting convened at short notice, and at the next meeting, which is convened at short notice, you can certainly treat it as a regular item of business.
Correct.
However, having said that, when such a requirement arises, there's going to be a lot of tension in the room there.
Absolutely.
I'm actually going to move on to Sudhakar. This is with respect to minutes and provisions of listing regulations, LODR. The question that I have received is, Companies Act requires dissent to a resolution to be recorded in the minutes, while LODR requires dissenting opinion to be captured. How do you balance these two requirements?
See, if I understood the question correctly, what he is said, referring to is that dissent to a resolution and dissent opinion about a particular item. See, dissent to any resolution means what? He is basically disagreeing to the resolution as such. So that is to be appropriately recorded, no discussion required for as far as that is concerned. Now the question is dissent opinion. Dissent opinion means what? Suppose if we might be discussing a particular issue in the board meeting, even after discussing also that particular director might be having a difference of opinion. So that is called as a basically dissent opinion.
Correct.
Even after expressing the dissent opinion, not necessarily that director is voting against the resolution. He must be voting for the resolution after expressing the dissent of opinion.
Absolutely.
Basically, in case of LODR, what they are asking us to capture is that if any director is expressing a dissent opinion, that dissent opinion is also to be captured in the minutes appropriately.
Sure.
So basically, Sudhakar, are you saying that while the whole purpose of the board is diverse views of all, getting a diverse view, a challenging status quo is definitely not something everything needs to be recorded, because that's the way you get the best out of the board. But having given all the answers, can we put it this way, having given all the answers which the directors require,
The
at
conclusive,
the end and the conclusion, if the director still says I am okay with this resolution, but yet this is subject to this, I think we may then have to record
Exactly.
that
Exactly.
dissenting
Yes.
opinion.
I fully appreciate
agree.
that.
Yeah.
That's what it is.
Yeah, that was a very fine distinction which was made by both Sudha as well as Narayan, I would say. Gitika, I have a question for you. Can the attendance register be taken to a place other than the registered office if the meeting is held over there? I don't see any problem in this.
Absolutely.
But let me ask Gitika also.
yes, absolutely.
Okay.
I actually just wanted to ask one question because we are discussing, and one of the other amendments that have been brought by the secretarial standard is where earlier there was a requirement of sending the minutes after the meeting. You have to send the minutes for comments. After that, you receive the comments, you close the minutes, you enter them into the entry book, and you send signed copies of the minutes to the board of directors for their records. I think there was a lot of voice and noise in the industry about about this requirement of sending the minutes multiply to the directors. And one of the amendment that secretarial standard has been brought is that if the director chooses,
Yes.
he can abstain from getting the minutes on multiple records. And the question that essentially arises is not just the amendment, but I think a mixed thought and opinion of people as to how to execute this on a day-to-day basis. So there are times where people ask us that, okay, now the secretarial standard allows you to not send the minutes. I don't think the secretarial standard allows you not to send the minutes. What the secretarial standard says is if the director chooses not to receive the minutes, that is when you do not send. And therefore, what is the practice that we should follow? So
Important distinction, very
Yeah.
important distinction you made.
And I think the practice that we can do is that which we should do is we should inform the directors about the amendment that has come by secretarial standard, so that they would understand as to what will be the implication if they do not receive the signed minutes. So not just telling them that it has been done away with, but what is the implication on them from a director's responsibility at a future point in time. And after that, if they choose to abstain from receiving the minutes, record that and then do not send the minutes. I just wanted to
In
leave this
fact,
for
very important point. In fact, this should be one of the major action points. Any meetings to be held first after 1st October, where you are briefing the board as part of, even if you are taking permission from the board, explicitly telling that, okay, are you agreeing for the signed minutes not to be circulated? A. Second, even when you are taking the approval of the board, the way Gitika you mentioned, that can the chairman accept comments post 7 days? And if the board now SS provides that the board can actually authorize the chairman to receive the comments even post 7 days. Then the key question arises, can that 7 days post, can it cross the 30 days? That will be the major question, which I will then ask Sudha also to chip in. So then are we saying that within 30 days you have to enter the minutes in the minutes book? But if a comment comes post that, are we going to entertain? Question number one. Question number one. Two is if there is any error apparent on the face. Secretarial standard now provides that even post entry in the register, but prior to noting, you can actually take up this item and provide in the next meeting the changes which you are making to the minute. So that I would like to have your views also.
You see, before Narayan, I go to your question, I will comment on Geetika's observation about that waiver of the receiving the certified copy of the signed minutes.
Signed minutes.
In fact, you see, the kind of arduous responsibilities what have been entrusted upon the directors, the kind of provisions what have been made in SS1 pertaining to the minutes about the recording of the minutes, after that circulation of the draft minutes to the directors, receiving their comments within 7 days, after that recording it, then taking it to the next meeting for signature of the chairman, then within 15 days of the signature of the chairman, the certified copies are to be given to the directors. With this, what is happening is the director is being given maximum comfort as well as confidence on the minutes portion is concerned. So whatever has been what's called a transacted at the meeting has been properly captured. Earlier this particular thing was not there. What ultimately the signed version of the minutes, the director have no this thing unless until he is asking for an inspection. Now the second question comes, if that is the case, why the directors will give a waiver for that thing? That is the question in one of the forums I have been asked. One of the responsibilities of the director is to maintain the confidentiality of the information whatever has been received by him.
Absolutely.
Now what is happening is there is a difference between agenda papers and there is a difference between the signed copies of the certified minutes. Now it is up to the director, because it is handling a file actually, according to me, keeping certified copy of the minutes at your office or at your home even, it is virtually you are handling a file. So now the director may think that I may not be able to handle this kind of a confidential information. Why I have to have that thing? So I don't want to receive the certified copy of the minutes because I have already been given that version of the minutes. So a director can always give the waiver. In fact, let me tell you that in one of the meetings when we have taken up for the first time when we were briefing our directors, the director said that why the certified copy of the minutes is to be given to me. We said that as per the secretarial standard we have to give it. Immediately the directors have expressed their this thing that we should not handle that particular certified copy minutes, we will give the waiver. Even prior to the provision, the revised version which has come to me. Now that Narayan, what you have asked this thing is, if you can just repeat once again, okay, because I may not be able to catch exactly. You are asking me.
No, the key point, what Gitika was mentioning is, we say the board can now authorize the chairman to entertain comments
30 days.
beyond 7 days.
Yes.
Correct. The question number one, the 7 days can even cross 30 days. Today, if you say beyond 7 days, you cannot say 15 plus 7, only 22, correct? 22 will cross. So there will be two occasions. One, you would have entered it in the register, but a comment goes to the chairman, and the chairman says, board has authorized me, I would like to, yes, it is correct, it is a factual thing, and I am using my discretion, please add it. Second way of looking at it is, one is this portion where it comes from a director. Second is where you yourself find any errors, and what is the process, the way, if you can,
I
how
understood
you
the
do it in the next meeting, if you can elaborate something on this.
See that once you circulate the draft minutes, within 7 days the directors have to give their observations. So here what happened is, even if a director is not able to attend the board meeting, still he can express his dissent as far as the resolution is concerned, or maybe a dissent opinion by approving that particular resolution. And suppose, for example, if the director is not expressing the dissent, that means it will be deemed to be as if it is his acceptance. Tomorrow, God forbids, if a litigation arises, he cannot say that I am not a party to that particular decision. So it is always advisable to the directors also to comment upon that minutes. It may so happen the particular director might be travelling during the 7 days, he might not be able to communicate his this thing. After 7 days, he might be communicating it to the chairman. Earlier, the chairman was having a discretion to accept or not to accept. Under the revised standard, the chairman is to be authorized by the board to accept such kind of these things. This is just to bring a kind of discipline also, and that because the chairman is not to be given everything at his whims and fancies only, to bring that kind of a governance measures, this has been revised. Now the question comes, if the opinion has been received beyond 30 days, what will happen? So within 30 days, you have to record the minutes. So if you receive any opinion beyond 30 days, the chairman cannot accept anything, because you are duty bound to record the minutes within 30 days. Now the question comes, after recording the minutes, there is apparently some error or something glaring mistake has taken place in that. How to correct that? How to rectify that particular thing? That is to be taken by way of a separate this thing in the next meeting. You cannot simply change the minutes. Once the minutes are recorded, it cannot be altered in any way, except maybe some kind of a comma, full stop, you may be able to do it, nothing beyond that. That is to be taken up in the next meeting before the agenda as a separate item, while noting the minutes. That is to be with the approval of the other directors. You may have to take any kind of alteration or corrections if it is to be done. That is what my view is.
Savitri, one point when Sudhakar was mentioning, which came to my mind and I'd like to raise to you, which is such an important point. You define independent directors cross the line and get into an officer in default,
Right.
only which quote unquote we call knowledge attributable through board processes, which you
Correct.
say agenda minutes. And one of the frustrations which directors have always had is the secretary will send the minutes and the penultimate day, that is virtually on the 15th day, and within 7 days if I am travelling and I have actually to give a dissent, so that I also need to protect myself, correct? Otherwise
Right.
I get into an officer. So today, with this provision, do you think secretarial standard is actually trying to protect the interest of independent directors, that even if you give it beyond the 7 days, here is it, you can ask the board to allow the chairman to accept that, and even if you give a dissenting either to the
Sure.
resolution or the opinion which Sudhakar says, it fortifies the independent directors actually.
Absolutely. I think that's a very good point that you've raised, Narayan. One is, there are 2 points which I would like to actually add. Going by para 7.4, this beyond 7 days, if the comment of the director is received beyond 7 days, the chairman has the liberty of accepting it, provided the chairman has been authorized by the board.
Correct.
So therefore, it is very necessary that a resolution be passed
Absolutely.
empowering the chairman to accept comments which are received beyond the 7-day period. Answering your specific question, Narayan, yes, the directors, whether the person be an independent director, executive, non-executive or otherwise, it is necessary for the directors to give their views even if it is beyond the 7-day period, so that the views of the director are taken on board. Ultimately, section 149(12) is very, very clear with respect to liability of the directors, where the director is supposed to know from the board process, and minutes is an integral part of the board process, and therefore this particular change of beyond 7 days is a very good change. It's quite possible that the director may be traveling,
Absolutely.
in which case he can always give his comments later. What's also important is all the directors on the date of the meeting are entitled to the signed copy of minutes. Not just all directors on the date of the meeting, it's even directors who are appointed thereafter. That means on the date when you are circulating the minutes, if there have been some directors who have been appointed in the interim period, you may have passed a circular resolution appointing a person as an additional director. He or she will also be entitled to a copy of the signed minutes, the certified copy. And such a person would not have waived the right because it's just immediately after his or her appointment. So these are small changes,
I
but
do
are
have one last question.
far-reaching changes which have been made in SS1. Yes, Gitika.
One
sure.
last question on this topic. I think
Sure.
we've covered well. One practical question is, while the minutes are open for comments for 7 days, and after that the company secretary is allowed to issue certified copies of the resolutions of the minutes for the purposes as may be required. Mostly it is for banking purposes, where you raise commercial papers, borrowings, etc. Now, there we've adequately covered where we've said that you will not give extract of the minutes, but you can give a certified
yeah.
copy of the resolution. We are talking about a window which is available to the chairman to allow modification or comments to the minutes. I'm just trying to raise a practical scenario where you issue certified copy of a resolution. Post issuing that, after the stipulated time of receiving comments, after 7 days, where it's confirmed by most, you issue the certified copy of the resolution, and after that you receive comments from a director. What would you do?
No, but Savitri, just adding to her confusion, this particular point will only come if you say that I presume Gitika is telling this is already there in the agenda. It is not something which is paid in the. If it comes as AOB, it comes into a different ballgame.
Yeah, that's a different question.
Okay, but if it is already there in the agenda, then majority of everybody is already clear. People have attended the board meeting, then there is no requirement of majority of the directors approving it. And at the meeting, if the directors have approved, then the only second eventuality we can think of, people who have not attended
Yes.
and then objecting to. So once the directors present have approved, you have passed a CTC, yes, if an objection comes or an amendment, the chairman can consider, put it in the minutes, but I don't think it will affect the CTC given. That's what broadly I was thinking.
Absolutely.
And maybe what Sudha said, that even if the board collectively decides, they can only decide in the next meeting and then pass a partial modification or a super session. But you cannot change the minutes that have been given.
That's right. Sudhakar, would you like to add
Yeah, I
something?
see that, as I was mentioning to you, whenever a resolution has been given along with the agenda, if that resolution is approved, that means what, that resolution no one can touch it. In fact, in the SS very clearly we have mentioned that minutes are to be recorded in the past tense and in the third person. As far as the resolution is concerned, it is to be in the present tense. Why it is? Because the resolution, the way it is proposed, it has been passed. Now what happened is, directors can give comments and all, but in the resolution apparently something is wrong, a wrong resolution is passed. Normally it never happens. Very rarest of the rarest occasions it may so happen, otherwise it should not happen. It should be, the company secretary should be very careful. Especially so when you are parting the resolution as a certified copy to the third parties. In case you want to make any change to that particular resolution, for whatever the reasons it may be, it should be by way of a modification to that resolution. It may be a partial modification if it is required, or alternately if the entire resolution is to be rehashed, then you have to go for a supersession of the resolution.
Absolutely. And also what is important is at a meeting in the agenda, you would have anyway circulated the draft resolution. If it is any other business, you may have tabled the resolution
Yeah.
or you may not have tabled. I think all three situations have been beautifully captured in SS1 now.
SS1.
Yeah.
Right. And also there is a flexibility which is now being given effective 1st of October, where you just can table a resolution at
Yes,
the
at the
meeting.
meeting.
I think that's a good point. Okay. I would like to go on to Sudhakar now. Does it mean that all decisions taken at a meeting of the board has to be recorded only in the form of resolutions? I think it's a good question that has come up to us, and I would ask
Yeah,
Sudha
in fact,
to clarify.
this question is several times the company secretaries think that decision means it is to be taken by way of a resolution. Decision never requires a resolution except only in the case of general meetings. Special business is there, that is to be mandatorily by way of a resolution. Ordinary business, no resolution is required. As far as board meetings are concerned, only where the act specifically requires that the decision is to be taken by way of a resolution, the resolution is to be passed, otherwise the decision can always be in a narrative form. In fact, several times I have also asked one more question also, that whether the minutes are to be in English only or can they be in vernacular language. In fact, one of the forums somebody asked me that his promoters are all Gujaratis, his shareholders are Gujaratis and the directors are Gujaratis and they do not know English. So, he asked me a question that whether the minutes are to be drafted necessarily to be in English or it can be in a vernacular language. In fact, in the guidance note we have clarified that minutes need not be in English only, it can be in a vernacular language, but any time if any resolution is to be filed with the ROC, that whether if they as a part of that this MGT 14 or DIR 12, whatever it may be, that point of time a translated version certified by the company secretary is to be filed with the ROC.
Yeah, vernacular, that's a very good
Very
point
good
that you
point.
covered, Sudhakar. This is of course very clearly provided in the Act, but let me once again read the question that I have got. Are all the pages of the minutes book required to be serially numbered? Does this include blank pages? Over to you, Sudhakar.
Yeah, unfortunately this is another thing that as far as 1956 Act is concerned, erstwhile section 193 and now 118, it is very clearly mentions that the minutes book is to be consecutively numbered. Every minute sheet is to be consecutively numbered. Consecutively numbered means 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and so on and so forth. That means even if a blank page is there in between the minutes, it is also a part of the minutes and that page is also to be numbered. It is to be scrolled off and also to be initialed by the chairman of that particular meeting. Several times I have observed that company secretaries do not get that particular scrolled off page initialed by the chairman, which is very much required. Similarly, one more thing also is that periodically we are getting the minutes book bounded. Some companies used to have a practice that whenever that new binder starts, it is 1, 2, 3, 4 again, which is not a correct practice, which is not even in compliance with the law. Compliance with the law means it is to be consecutively numbered, even if there is a break, that
Break of the book.
Yeah, because of that book binding. That also we have clarified adequately in the guidance note.
Actually, the clock is ticking away and the questions are just increasing by the minute. Does electronic means mean including teleconferencing where it is recorded? Narayan, if you can answer this.
Electronic mode is clearly defined in secretarial standards as video conferencing or any other audio visual means, and hence teleconferencing does not, neither the Act, rules nor secretarial standard will allow. You will have to have a mechanism where you are recording the exact entire proceedings, and such proceedings will have to be kept till the audit for that year is over.
Right. There's one question which I'm going to take up. It says subpara 5 of para 5.1.2 of revised SS says the chairman shall ensure that required quorum is present throughout the meeting, and at the end of the discussion on each agenda item the chairman shall announce the summary of the decision taken thereon. This actually is exactly in line with rule 3 of chapter 12 rules, but let me read the question further. Kindly suggest how to comply with the aforesaid requirement pertaining to matter to be written in this context in the minutes and its placement in the minutes. Let me just clarify that this is only applicable to meetings conducted through video conferencing means, that is VC, which is covered under Rule 3. And also, this has been very clearly covered in the responsibilities of the chairman in the guidance note at page number 63. Moving on with further questions.
Can I just take
Sure,
one
go on.
question? The question before this was about meeting held through teleconference. Maybe I'll ask Narayan Shankar
Sure.
sir to only elaborate on this. Seldom there are questions around how to deal a situation where a director requests to attend a meeting through teleconferencing. I think we are amply clear when someone attends physically. We are more or less clear when it comes to VC. And when I say clear, it also means clarity around his presence, his being counted in the quorum, him being recorded, payment of sitting fees. Would you like to say quickly summarize that if a director requests you that he wants to attend a meeting through teleconferencing, would you count him as a quorum? Would you pay him sitting fees? The details around person attending through teleconferencing.
So a lot of times a director may be Gitika in a place where it may be difficult for him to get into an audiovisual means
Yeah.
or getting into video conferencing. You will also have difficulties, specifically he may have a media of attending which may not be capable of security, which may not be capable of recording. Even then it becomes difficult. Having said that, specifically where you have two types of meeting where you have already planned it well in advance,
Yeah.
where all directors are clear they have to attend, but you also have intermittent where urgent business have to be transaction, it can only be done at the meeting and cannot be done by circular. In such a case, you can allow a person to come through audio call. You need to have the same process at least that no other person is there along with
Yeah.
specifically if UPSI is being
Yeah.
discussed. You can even make a mention in the minutes that the person attended through teleconferencing, however yet leave of absence was given,
Yeah.
because the act only allows you if it is
Yes.
through video conferencing.
Yeah.
And of course if he is not present, question of sitting fees
Does not arise.
That's right.
Will it change? I'm just extending one
Go
more.
ahead.
Yeah.
Will any of this change if it's about if the meeting is being conducted for the restricted items?
For the restricted items also, I am saying you cannot have somebody through VC, which you say, of course, there are changes being suggested both in the company's amendment bill, but
bill
that's
and
a separate
precisely.
issue. I don't want to get in because
Yeah.
the law as of today,
That's right.
there is no discretion
No,
available
absolutely.
to allow anybody at least through VC on restricted items.
Yeah.
I would like to add, as far as teleconferencing is concerned,
Yeah.
no doubt that as far as teleconferencing is concerned, Act is silent about that. It has provided that the directors who are attending in person or through audio visual means only will be counted for the purpose of quorum. But Act has not prohibited a director to attend the meeting through teleconference.
Yes.
So that means what? Suppose wherever it is not possible, the director can attend the meeting through teleconference, but he will not be counted for the purpose of quorum, and he has no right to vote at the meeting. Only he can simply participate only.
Yes.
But only one point, Sudha, which
As far as his presence is
Yeah.
concerned, it can be recorded as
Recorded
if
in
he
the
was
minutes.
present in this
Yes.
thing. Sitting fee payment is concerned, it depends upon the discretion of the company. If he wants to make the payment, the Act is not prohibiting that the payment is not to be made.
No, but if a person is
Yeah.
coming through teleconferencing, you are not showing him as present, correct?
Yes,
Because
sir.
even if, with the teleconferencing, okay.
See, because there are several times it happens, as you rightly mentioned.
Of course, it's an
a director
interpretation
will
in
not be
person. What
able
do you
to attend
define
the
in
VC,
person?
But
Absolutely.
he is sitting all through the meeting. Suppose if the meeting is taking place at 3 hours, he is there on that audio this thing for the entire 3 hours. And it is not like that he is not contributing. He is definitely participating in the discussion because the law is not permitted. He will not be counted for the purpose of quorum, and he will not be able to vote on that particular item. But he can definitely express his this thing and all.
So you are again making a subtle distinction that if a
Yes.
person, you are saying that quorum I will not allow him to vote, but because you are saying the definition of attending in person is quite wide, and if you
Yeah.
interpret
Yes.
it that way,
Yes.
you can at least show him as present.
That's true.
Very nice.
Which is why I made this question, because there are multiple practices that are going on,
in the
industry.
That's right. Yeah. Okay. Should every notice specifically state that facility of video conferencing would be available?
Yeah, that is required very much. As I was mentioning to you, it is under the obligation of the company to do that. So you have to mention in the notice in case any director wants to attend the meeting through electronic means, that will be provided.
Right. This question which we have received shows if there is one within bracket. I think this if there is one is not relevant because you're supposed to give this,
Yes.
Yes.
offer the facility and ask the directors as to whether they're going to be participating.
As that is
That's the
deleted
major
now,
change.
which is in
Exactly. Which
and
is
in
actually.
fact, in this notice, as we've been discussing, you should clearly mention, as Sudha mentioned, like if you are not a big time company or a medium size, you can clearly mention what is adequate notice he has to give.
That's right.
So that you are able to arrange for the VC facility.
That's true. Okay. Narayan, this is a question for you. In the secretarial standards, we have an annexure which gives an illustrative list of items which cannot be passed by circulation. The question that we have received is this list mandatory or only recommendatory?
No, the list which is appended to the secretarial standard where items have to be given only at the board meeting is mandatory. You will have to ensure that those items you cannot do it by circular, you will have to do it at a meeting of the board.
Sudhakar, would you like
Yeah,
to
that
add?
only thing is that say sometimes that though the word illustrative is getting confused, illustrative means only for example like,
Yeah.
what it means is it is not inclusive this thing, but it is only illustrative means there may be some other this thing in addition to that whatever are not covered under the act, if it requires, it requires.
Right.
That is what the mean.
Okay. Well, there's another question. It says, if a circular resolution has been passed on 15th November 2017, for which we have to file an e-form to MCA, which date should we mention as the date of approval in the e-form?
So
I
what
think
is
the
it?
question
No,
is
I
very
think
simple.
we cleared very clearly that you can make a mention in the circular resolution itself that it will be deemed to be passed on what date. Even if you, the way we said, we can even put the same date when you are circulating or give a date more than 7 days.
Right.
But as we said that it can be, if you want to treat it as passed prior to the last date, then you have to ensure, as we discussed, eventuality of ruling out the 1/3. But the date mentioned in your draft that this is going to be passed on so and so date will be the date for filing.
Right. Okay. Can a company secretary sign a resolution as certified true copy in respect of a circular resolution? Narayan, I think you've already addressed it.
Yes.
Maybe if you would like to just add one or two more sentences.
Yes, as I said, the most important point which a company secretary needs to do is, if at all, and this is a change being brought about by even the secretarial standard, the most important point is we allow resolutions even to be tabled. However, you have to ensure that if your team, the finance team or accounts team, wants an immediate certified true copy, you need to ensure that at least the resolution is tabled at the meeting. If the resolution is not tabled at the meeting, then there is a problem that the secretary cannot have a CTC immediately. Then you will have to wait till it is being cleared by the members, put it in the minutes, and it gets delayed. And hence, as an action point, every item where you know a CTC is required, ensure that it is sent with the agenda or at least tabled at the meeting, without which you will get into problems post that.
Right. The next question is for Gitika. Can a director or a CS, company secretary or an invitee electronically sign the attendance register? So is there any bar on an invitee attending the meeting electronically, and what is the provision? If you can just elaborate on this.
I think this is one of the most relevant questions around this time, where I think many large companies, many companies have started conducting board meetings through electronic means, where directors have their iPads, the notice is sent to them through a software, the agenda papers are sent to them through a software on their iPads. The answer according to me for this is yes, because I would say a signature includes a digital signature. So you may have a software where you would put a notice to the director saying, would you, where you will send a calendar invite to the director saying attend the meeting. He would say a yes, and when he comes and attends the meeting, at that point in time the software would open and it will trigger for the board meeting discussion only if he signs saying that I am attending the meeting, and the moment I think he accepts, he puts a yes and he affixes his digital signature. As long as the company secretary can preserve this in terms of a record keeping, his signature is valid, I don't see one reason why a director cannot sign the attendance register electronically.
Sure. Gitika, I have the next question for you once again. Are there any provisions mandating a minimum number of meetings in case of committee meetings or in case of meetings of independent directors?
Okay. So the first one that I'll take is independent director, because that is the one which is the most discussed. I think the ministry has amply clarified about 1.5 to 2 months ago, where it has said that when we say that one independent directors meeting is required to be conducted, the year means financial year. If you read the present SS1, the amended SS1, it still mentions the word calendar. It's because the SS1 was sent to the ministry for approval before such clarification. However, the law that stands today is the requirement is to have one meeting in one financial year. So between 1st April to 31st March you hold that meeting. Coming to the other committee meetings, I think I would bifurcate them into the committees which are mandatorily required under the law and which we cover under SS, which is audit committee and the NRC, because they are required under law. For them, I would segregate the set of companies into two. One is listed entities and one are the other companies. Right. So listed entities, while that the law is very clear, the audit committee needs to approve the financial results, and therefore you can say the minimum times the audit committee needs to meet is 4. Obviously, it can also meet to discuss the other items in its scope. And for the other companies, if once you fall back to Companies Act and if you are required to have an audit committee, I would say it's once a year. And coming to the other committees like NRC and SRC, I don't think there is any requirement mentioned in the Companies Act or the LODR. Neither does NRC or SRC have a section like 179 which says that certain items need to be transacted only at a meeting. So therefore, NRC and SRC can meet as per the scope of agenda. And well, I think there are few items which go to the board under 179 which fall within the scope of NRC. For example, when you appoint a KMP, now that needs to be approved by board only in a meeting, and every KMP appointment needs to be recommended by an NRC. So maybe a logical extension to the same would be that yes, this is one item that NRC should do in a meeting. However, having said that, to summarize, there is no requirement for NRC and SRC, and for audit we have already discussed.
Can I ask a supplementary question? And this can be addressed by all, Sudha, you please feel to chip in. This question I think was on meeting of independent directors, and Savitri, Sudha, Gitika, we have got diverse practices in corporates, specifically when it comes to minuting of independent directors. So once you say that independent directors have to meet without the management, which of course includes the CS, is there a point of even maintaining minutes? Because there are two views. Some corporates do not, or majority of them say that there is no need of doing any minutes of the independent directors because they are by default meant to be confidential, that they can really have a free discussion around that meeting. Second, if the independent directors brief the board as part of the board proceedings of any item coming as part of the independent directors, any concerns or any issues, that gets recorded in the board meeting per se. But you will also have some companies maintaining minutes of even the independent directors. I thought, where are we on this?
Okay. I do have some views on this, but
Sudha,
would like to start.
See, first that several times the question asked me is that whether SS1 is applicable to independent directors meeting. In fact, that question itself is wrong according to me, is that because it is a meeting, no doubt about it, but it is not a meeting of a board meeting or a committee meeting. So apparently SS1 is not applicable to that on the face of it, that every one of us knows that. But definitely independent directors meeting also has to have some procedures. A notice is to be given or not to be given. Sometimes when the question comes is whether independent directors meeting a notice is to be given or not to be given. Attendance is to be taken or not to be taken. Minutes are to be maintained or not to be maintained. But we should know one thing very clearly, that independent directors meeting is a mandatory meeting, and once in a financial year this meeting has to take place, and at the time of secretarial audit it is to be established that the meeting has taken place. Similarly, God forbids, if there is an inspection or investigation by the regulatory authorities, that point of time also this independent directors meeting has taken place, that is to be established. In the absence of attendance, in the absence of attendance register or the minutes, how you will be able to establish that meeting has taken place? Number one. Number two, unless until you give a notice in writing, how the independent director will come to know when the meeting is going to take place, how about the venue, timing, etc., etc. Third question comes now, who will take the minutes when because the company secretary may not be allowed to for that meeting. It depends upon the independent directors whether to permit the company secretary to be a part of that meeting, or the independent directors meeting themselves can do it. That point of time, the lead independent director who is going to be there, if anybody, or the senior director may take the lead and give the discussions as a bullet points to the company secretary. He may be able to develop that thing.
Yeah.
The minutes of the independent directors need not be in the legal flavor, need not be there. It is to be simpliciter the whatever the discussions have taken place. Whether that independent directors minutes are to be circulated to the directors along with the next board agenda, answer is no, they need not be circulated. Who will be the custodian of those minutes? If the independent directors impose confidence on the company secretary, they may entrust upon the responsibility to the company secretary. Alternately, they may request the chairman that the minutes are to be in his custody. But to a large extent, it is ultimately the company secretary who has to deal with all these things, and definitely he is the person who normally convene the meetings and uphold the integrity of all these meetings.
Yeah.
The independent director definitely can impose confidence on that and may entrust upon that thing to him. This is what my view is.
Geetika,
In
your
fact,
views?
to add one more question also is, sometimes when tricky question comes, whether the sitting fee is to be paid to the independent directors or not. It is absolutely the discretion of the company. There is no prohibition. If the company wants to pay the sitting fee to the independent directors meeting, please do pay. But if the management takes a decision that
Yeah.
no, since it is not a legal meeting, I will not pay the sitting fees, it is up to the management.
So, I would quickly summarize as to what I understand of independent directors meeting. It starts from the Companies Act, where a company secretary plays a role where he or she facilitates holding of such meeting. To me, the role starts and stops there, provided the independent directors want it that way. To me, the whole piece around independent directors meeting has to be led and decided by the independent directors themselves.
Absolutely.
Whether they want us to just facilitate, send the notice or stop there, whether they want us to attend or not attend. Once they attend, suppose we do not attend, they do not want us to attend, I think maybe the company secretary can mention that if you want that out of your discussions, there are few points that need to be taken forward or should be carried forward to the management or to the board. Give us those points separately. At the same time, now I'll just go through each step quickly. So, for example, I started with notice, where the company secretary will give a notice that I have spoken to all of you and here I am conducting this meeting. Coming to the sitting fees, I think there was a lot of ambiguity earlier, but I think a common stand that has been taken by everyone is that because this meeting is not for the purposes for running the company, and therefore the independent directors are generally not paid. There is another view which says, but eventually they are meeting for a company's purpose. So, I'm just extending what Sudhakarji said is, there is no prohibition on paying. At the same time, there is nothing which mandatory tells you to pay the independent directors. Right. So, this is a decision that they take and the management takes. Coming to the minutes and recording of the discussion, a usual practice is that the director tells the company secretary that we met and we discussed all of this. The practical issue that we face at the end of the year is when a secretarial auditor and a statutory auditor comes and asks you that, did you do the meeting? What is the proof? Give us the minutes. I think at that point in time, what I have started as a practice is that we request the directors to sign one page and say that all of us, we met on this day, this time for the independent directors meeting, and we confirm, and they all sign it at the end, and that is a document which you can share with your auditors and your secretarial auditor. It is not required to necessarily send them the minutes.
That's right.
The second is on the minutes. So, who records it? Who are you supposed to share it with? I think that is the area where the role of the company secretary is the most important, where he talks to the independent directors as is, what is your opinion? Have you discussed something that I need to carry forward to the management? Let me know. In the next meeting, table that they met and they want this to be informed to the larger board. Assuming there are point of discussions which they do not want to share, that can be left with them.
Right.
And the last is on the sitting fees, which we already discussed. So, that's the chain of
So,
events according to
Savitri,
me.
you have two or three diverse Once you say that you have to maintain minutes, the other you say that you facilitate the meeting,
Right.
give them all the infrastructure, but since it has to be in the absence of management, the CS being part of a KMP does not enter inside.
Right.
Your last word.
I think this is one item which possibly can go on for another half an hour, but we are actually short of time. Notice of the meeting, I would say necessarily needs to be given. I don't have to elaborate on this once again because my panelists have very beautifully covered this particular point. Agenda, there is a statutory agenda which is anyways given in the Act to be more specific in Schedule 4. You need to have it. So the agenda also needs to be given. Typically for notice and agenda to be done, it is facilitated by the company secretary. Sometimes the independent directors ask the company secretary to issue these two to the independent directors. Few other cases, the company secretary facilitates and sends it to the lead independent director. Of course, today Companies Act does not have the concept of lead independent director. This is one of practice and practical significance which most companies have actually appointed. On the issue of attendance register and signing of attendance, I would say it is necessary. If you ask me, I would use a more stronger term and say it is a must because you've attended this particular meeting. Minutes, yes, there are two divergent views, and I would also hold that it is not compulsory to record the minutes of this meeting because it is one where there are certain statutory items which the independent directors are supposed to be considering. If the independent directors in their wisdom do not feel it is necessary to be recording the minutes, they are not required to record the minutes. They could just, the lead independent director can possibly just have a round of discussion with the chairman and brief on the top 3 points which the lead independent director feels is important. What is very important is one of the items which the independent directors are supposed to be discussing in their meeting is adequacy of information and the time that they get to take an informed decision. If there is a red flag raised on this, it is necessary to bring it up at the next board meeting and ensure that it is clearly recorded. While there is no minutes which is required to be statutorily recorded, as Gitika was mentioning, the secretarial auditors generally ask for proof of conducting. One very good way is at the next board meeting held after the independent directors meeting, have an item for noting stating that on so and so date the meeting of the independent directors was conducted, and just ensure it is noted. It is not even necessary to specifically write as to who attended and who did not attend because that's evidenced by the attendance register. So this would be a good practice. Going on to the last question on this particular point on sitting fees, yes, it is left to the discretion of each company. It's up to them as to whether they would like to pay sitting fees or not. There are two market practices currently prevailing. Few cases the independent directors are of the view that it's a part of their duties and therefore they would not take sitting fees for attending meeting of the independent directors. Few other cases the board passes a resolution because the independent directors are actually devoting their time and attention. There is no bar. I would actually like to also refer to the OECD principles which also leaves this question open. It says it is left to the discretion of each of the board to decide as to whether it should be paid or not. Actually, there are several more questions that I have received, but if I take a look at the clock, it's ticking away and showing that there's very little time left for us to complete this particular session. In fact, on Secretarial Standards 1, there are several questions which also beg an answer and a more detailed discussion. For example, the term courier has been dropped, which was very beautifully covered by Sudhakar in his opening remarks. And while the Act at section 175, which deals with circular resolution, clearly includes the term courier, in section 173, it does not include the word courier. So therefore, the secretarial standards are aligned to the provisions of the law, but maybe one might over a period of time see a change there, because if it is allowed with respect to some other provision, maybe eventually it will be allowed even with respect to notice, agenda and the like. Adjourned board meeting and issues of national holiday. There are several issues and questions which we are unable to answer today. Video conferencing, a beautiful distinction between Rule 3 and Rule 4 is proposed to be brought in the Companies Amendment Bill 2017, where participation of a director through VC is going to be permitted even on restricted items, provided quorum is present through physical at the physical meeting of the company concerned. The distinction between holding a meeting through video conferencing means and discussion of an item where a director participates through video conferencing is actually brought in by this particular amendment, which we should be waiting for it to come through. Concept of lead independent director, which of course is going to be applicable only to listed companies, which is the recommendation of the Uday Kotak committee, is also one which requires a very detailed discussion. I'm actually at a loss because there are several questions which we are unable to answer as a panel, and I'm sure my wonderful panelists would have very much liked to continue, but owing to paucity of time, we will have to possibly stop over here. But what I would like to say is, this session, we've seen a wonderful list of questions coming up. There's been a lovely participation by persons, and I'm told that the participation has been excellent in terms of numbers. But it's just that we do not have enough time to cover all the questions, and therefore, I think we will possibly need to have SS1 discussion, Series 2 as well as Series 3 to cover most of the issues exhaustively. With these words, I would like to...
One line
Yeah, sure,
I want
go
to
on.
add is that several times that some company secretaries ask a question that whether the secretarial standards are mandatorily to be complied with. If we don't comply, what are the penal provisions? I am not getting into what are the penal provisions, certainly they are there. But only this much I can say that when you are driving a vehicle, you have to wear the seat belt or not. If you are wearing the seat belt, what are the advantages? If you are not wearing the seat belt, what are the disadvantages? Same is the case, according to me, is compliance with SS1 and as well as SS2 also. The amount of arduous responsibilities what has been imposed upon the directors, imposed upon the key managerial persons, if anyone can save these two people, it is SS1 as well as SS2, like a seat belt.
Wonderful. I think that was very nicely put. Gitika, would you like to add
One
something?
last point, and to me the major amendment in SS1 is the seat belt for the directors through the director's responsibility statement. So I think that's one of the major amendments, and maybe we can cover it in the subsequent webinars. So yes.
Yeah, nothing. I think we
Okay. All that I would like to add is, it's all about our journey to ensure excellent corporate governance in India. And I would very soon see a company secretary very clearly signing off at every meeting stating that the company is in compliance with secretarial standards. Although there is a specific statement with respect to Companies Act, the directors are very soon going to ask company secretaries to cover this so as to ensure that para 9 of SS1 is clearly covered by them. Secretarial standards is nothing but all about corporate governance, and we've already started our journey and we're doing pretty well there. The questions and the quality of questions clearly go to show that. Thank you very much. Thank you to my panelists. Thank you, Sudhakar. Thank you, Gitika. Thank you, Narayan.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.